You're just a washed-up nobody, my daughter-in-law sneered as she introduced me to her prestigious colleagues on her wedding day. I stood there in silence, feeling every word like a dagger while the room buzzed with judgmental stares. I'd chosen a simple life after tragedy, and now even my own family saw me as powerless and irrelevant. But what they didn't know was that behind the old pickup truck and modest house was a man holding secrets that could shake this entire hall. They had no idea the tables were about to turn, that the nobody they mocked had changed the lives of thousands. And that day, surrounded by the medical elite, Amanda was about to discover exactly who she had underestimated. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. At my son's wedding, his bride introduced me to her colleagues as a washed-up nobody who never achieved anything. In medicine, the room fell silent when the American Heart Association president smiled, shook my hand, and said, "Dr. Kensington, it's an honor to meet the man who saved my daughter's life with your revolutionary heart device." I watched Amanda's face drain of color as Dr. Richard Hayes continued, his voice carrying across the elegant reception hall at Portland Country Club. "You do realize you're speaking to one of the most celebrated cardiac surgeons in medical history, right?" The champagne glass slipped from Amanda's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor, with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly hushed crowd. My new daughter-in-law, Dr. Amanda Cross, stood frozen in her designer wedding dress, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I don't understand," she stammered, looking between Dr. Hayes and me with growing horror. "This is just Thomas's father. He's nobody special. He volunteers at some free clinic." Dr. Hayes raised his eyebrows, his expression shifting from surprise to something considerably less friendly. "Nobody special, Amanda. This man pioneered the Kensington 3000 artificial heart device. Half the cardiac surgeons in this country learned their techniques from his research papers." I remained silent, watching the recognition slowly dawn in Amanda's eyes. For 6 months she had treated me like an embarrassing relative, a failed old man who couldn't measure up to her prestigious medical career. She had lectured me about real medicine, dismissed my volunteer work as meaningless, and made it abundantly clear that I was a disappointment as a father-in-law. Now, surrounded by the medical elite she had been so eager to impress, Amanda was learning that assumptions could be devastatingly expensive. "But he drives an old pickup truck," she whispered, as if this somehow negated 30 years of groundbreaking cardiac surgery. "He lives in a small house. He doesn't even have a proper medical practice." Dr. Hayes's expression hardened. "Amanda, some of the greatest minds in medicine choose humility over ostentation. Dr. Kensington retired after losing his wife to the very heart condition he spent his career fighting. He could have lived in luxury, but instead chose to serve the underserved at free clinics." My son Thomas appeared at Amanda's side, his face a mixture of pride and concern. He had always known bits and pieces of my past, but I had never shared the full extent of my medical achievements. After my wife Sarah passed away 5 years ago, I had deliberately chosen a quiet life, wanting to serve without recognition. Dad, Thomas said softly, "Maybe you should tell her about the patents." I shook my head gently. The patents, the awards, the medical journal covers, none of that mattered now. What mattered was the lesson unfolding before us. Dr. Hayes wasn't finished. "Amanda, the artificial heart device you use in your surgeries at Johns Hopkins, the one you praised in your residency thesis as revolutionary, that's Dr. Kensington's invention. The surgical technique you learned for complex valve replacements. He developed that too." The color that had drained from Amanda's face was now replaced by a deep red flush of mortification. Other wedding guests had begun to gather around us, drawn by the dramatic exchange. Several prominent cardiologists nodded in recognition as they spotted me, their faces lighting up with genuine respect. Dr. Kensington called out Dr. Maria Santos, Chief of Cardiology at Oregon Health and Science University. "I had no idea you'd be here. Your lecture series in the 90s changed my entire approach to pediatric heart surgery." Amanda swayed slightly, and Thomas quickly steadied her arm. The woman who had spent months explaining to me how real medicine worked was discovering that she had been lecturing one of the founding fathers of modern cardiac surgery. The irony was almost too perfect. Almost, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began 6 months earlier, when Thomas first brought Amanda home to meet me. It was a crisp October evening when my son's silver BMW pulled into the driveway of my modest 2-bedroom house in southeast Portland. I watched from the kitchen window as Thomas hurried around to open the passenger door for a tall, elegant woman in an expensive coat. Even from a distance, I could see the way her eyes swept over my small front yard, taking in the weathered fence and the old maple tree I had been meaning to trim. "Dad, this is Amanda," Thomas said as they entered through the back door, his voice carrying that particular nervousness of a man hoping two important people in his life will get along. "Amanda, meet my father, Cornelius." Amanda extended a perfectly manicured hand, her grip firm but brief. "Dr. Cross," she corrected with a professional smile. "I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon at Johns Hopkins." "Just Cornelius is fine," I replied, wiping my hands on the kitchen towel. I had been preparing dinner, in a nothing fancy, just pot roast with vegetables. "Thomas has told me wonderful things about your work." Her eyes immediately went to my hands, noting the absence of expensive jewelry, then swept across my simple kitchen with its outdated appliances and mismatched chairs. I could practically see her mental calculations. FS. This was not the home of someone who had achieved anything significant. "And what do you do, Cornelius?" she asked, settling into the chair Thomas pulled out for her. The question carried that particular tone medical professionals use when they assume they're speaking to someone outside their field. "I'm retired," I answered, simply bringing the roast to the table. "These days I volunteer at the Southeast Community Health Clinic." Amanda's eyebrows rose slightly. "A free clinic. That's charitable of you." The word charitable carried just enough condescension to make Thomas shift uncomfortably in his seat. "The work is rewarding," I said, serving generous portions. "We see a lot of folks who can't afford regular medical care. Heart conditions, mostly." "Heart conditions," Amanda perked up her professional interest, overriding her social judgment. "What kind of training do you have? Are you qualified to handle cardiac cases?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Dad has some medical background, Amanda. He's not just a volunteer." But Amanda was already in lecture mode, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she probably used with medical students. "Cardiac medicine is incredibly complex, Cornelius. It requires years of specialized training, board certifications, ongoing education. Free clinics, while well-intentioned, often do more harm than good when volunteers attempt procedures beyond their skill level." I nodded thoughtfully, cutting my pot roast into small pieces. "You're absolutely right about the complexity. The human heart is remarkable. 4 chambers working in perfect synchronization, electrical impulses firing at precisely the right intervals. When something goes wrong, the consequences can be devastating." "Exactly," Amanda said, warming to her subject. "That's why real cardiac medicine requires extensive residency training fellowship programs, years of supervised practice. It's not something you can learn from volunteer work." Thomas tried to redirect the conversation. "Amanda just finished a complex valve replacement surgery last week. The patient was only 32 years old." "Impressive," I said genuinely. "Valve replacements in young patients require exceptional skill." "What technique did you use?" Amanda launched into a detailed description of the procedure, her voice filled with professional pride. As she spoke, I recognized several innovations I had developed decades earlier, techniques that had become standard practice. She had no idea she was explaining my own work back to me. "The beauty of modern cardiac surgery," she concluded, "is how far we've advanced from the primitive techniques of earlier generations. Surgeons today have tools and knowledge that the old-timers could never have imagined." "The old-timers," I repeated quietly. Yes, I suppose they did their best with what they had. After dinner, as Amanda excused herself to take a phone call from the hospital, Thomas lingered in the kitchen while I washed dishes. "She's brilliant, Dad," he said defensively. "One of the youngest department heads at Johns Hopkins. Her research on pediatric heart defects is groundbreaking." "She's clearly accomplished," I agreed, scrubbing a stubborn spot on the roasting pan. "And she loves you. That's what matters most." But as I watched Amanda through the window, pacing on my small back porch while discussing surgical schedules with obvious authority, I couldn't help but wonder what she would say if she knew the old-timer washing dishes had written the textbook she learned from. Over the following months, Amanda's visits to Portland became more frequent, and with each encounter her condescension grew bolder. The breaking point came on a rainy February afternoon when she decided to see for herself where I spent my volunteer hours. The Southeast Community Health Clinic occupied a converted warehouse in an area of Portland that Amanda's GPS had marked with warnings about crime rates. As her pristine white Audi pulled into the cracked parking lot, I watched through the clinic's front window as she carefully locked her car twice and hurried toward the entrance, clutching her designer purse like a shield. "This is where you work?" she asked, her nose wrinkling as she took in the waiting room filled with worn furniture and outdated magazines. A young mother bounced a crying baby while an elderly man coughed persistently in the corner. "This is where I help," I corrected gently, leading her past the reception desk, where Maria, our volunteer coordinator, waved cheerfully. Dr. Kensington called out James, a regular patient with chronic heart failure. "Are you going to check my blood pressure today?" "Of course, James. Give me just a few minutes." Amanda's head snapped toward me. "Doctor, they call you doctor. It's a term of respect," I explained. "Many of our patients are elderly. They appreciate formality," but Amanda wasn't listening. Her attention had shifted to the examination rooms, each one barely larger than a closet equipped with basic medical supplies that belonged in a museum rather than a modern medical facility. "Cornelius, this is dangerous," she whispered urgently. "These people think you're qualified to provide actual medical care. What happens when someone has a real emergency? A heart attack, cardiac arrest?" Before I could answer, the clinic's alarm bell rang, our signal for a medical emergency. I immediately moved toward examination room 3, where Mrs. Rodriguez, a 67-year-old woman with a history of heart problems, was clutching her chest and struggling to breathe. "Call 911. I told Maria, then turned to Mrs. Rodriguez with the calm authority that comes from 40 years of cardiac emergencies. "Elena, I need you to try to stay calm. Can you describe the pain for me?" Amanda stood frozen in the doorway as I quickly assessed Mrs. Rodriguez's condition. Her pulse was rapid and irregular, her skin clammy, her breathing labored. Classic signs of acute cardiac distress. "This is exactly what I was talking about," Amanda hissed. "You're not qualified to handle this. You could kill her." I ignored her, focusing entirely on my patient. Years of experience had taught me to recognize the subtle differences between panic attacks, angina, and genuine myocardial infarction. Mrs. Rodriguez was having what appeared to be an episode of atrial fibrillation, serious but manageable with proper care. "Elena, I'm going to give you something to help regulate your heart rhythm," I said, preparing a carefully measured dose of medication from our emergency supply. "The ambulance is coming, but this will help you feel better while we wait." "You can't administer cardiac medication," Amanda snapped. "You don't have the authority or the expertise. This woman needs real medical care." Mrs. Rodriguez looked between us with frightened eyes. "Dr. Cornelius has been taking care of my heart for 2 years," she said weakly. "He saved my life before." "Saved your life?" Amanda's voice rose dangerously. "This man has never saved a life that mattered. He's playing doctor with people who don't know better." The words hung in the air like poison. "Never saved a life that mattered." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but a crystalline clarity about who Amanda really was beneath her professional achievements. Within minutes, the paramedics arrived and confirmed my assessment. Mrs. Rodriguez was indeed experiencing atrial fibrillation, and the medication I had administered had already begun to stabilize her condition. "Good work, Doc," the lead paramedic said as they prepared to transport her. "Your quick thinking probably prevented this from getting much worse." As the ambulance pulled away, Amanda stood in the parking lot, her expensive coat spotted with rain, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Those paramedics don't know your background," she said defensively. "They're just being polite." I looked at her for a long moment, this brilliant young surgeon who could perform miracles in an operating room but couldn't see the value in caring for people who couldn't pay for miracles. "Amanda," I said quietly, "someday you might learn that the measure of a life saved isn't found in the patient's bank account." She turned away without responding, but I could see the rigid set of her shoulders that my words had hit their mark. As I watched her drive away, I realized that Amanda wasn't just arrogant. She was dangerous. Her prejudices ran so deep that she couldn't recognize competent medical care when it was happening right in front of her. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. That evening, I sat in my study for the first time in months, surrounded by the achievements I had spent 5 years trying to forget. The room was a shrine to a life I had deliberately left behind. Medical journals with my research on the covers framed patents for surgical innovations, photographs with colleagues who had become legends in their own right. On the mahogany desk sat my most prized possession, a crystal award from the American Heart Association, presented in 2015 for lifetime achievement in cardiac surgery. The inscription read, "To Dr. Cornelius Kensington, whose pioneering work has saved over 50,000 lives and revolutionized modern cardiac care." 50,000 lives. Amanda's cruel words echoed in my memory, never saved a life that mattered. I picked up the photograph next to the award, Sarah and me, at the medical conference, where I had presented the Kensington 3000 artificial heart device for the first time. She was radiant in her blue dress, her eyes shining with pride as I held the prototype that would go on to save thousands of patients worldwide. That device, the one Amanda used regularly in her own surgeries, had been born from our shared dream of making cardiac surgery accessible to everyone, regardless of their economic status. Sarah had died 3 years later, her own heart failing despite everything I knew about cardiac medicine. The irony was devastating. I could save strangers, but I couldn't save the woman I loved most. That's when I had made the decision to step away from the spotlight to serve quietly in places where recognition didn't matter. But Amanda had forced my hand. I opened the locked drawer where I kept my most sensitive documents. Inside lay the correspondence that would shock even the medical establishment, MIT, letters from the Nobel Committee recommending me for consideration in physiology or medicine, patent documents showing my ownership of 17 major cardiac innovations, royalty statements revealing that every artificial heart device manufactured in the United States included my proprietary technology. The financial documents were even more staggering. The sale of my patents and the ongoing royalties had generated more wealth than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. The modest house, the old pickup truck, the simple lifestyle, all deliberate choices to honor Sarah's memory and focus on service rather than status. My phone rang, interrupting my reflection. The caller ID showed Thomas's number. "Dad, I need to talk to you about Amanda," he said without preamble. "She's upset about what happened at the clinic today. She thinks you're in over your head with medical situations you can't handle. What do you think, son?" There was a long pause. "I think there's a lot about your past that you've never told me. Amanda mentioned that the paramedics called you Doc like they knew you, and some of the things you said about heart surgery. Dad, were you more than just a volunteer?" I looked at the wall of achievements surrounding me, photographs with 3 different surgeons, general commendation letters from president's medical textbooks I had authored that were still used in universities worldwide. "Thomas, what would you say if I told you that everything Amanda thinks she knows about cardiac medicine she learned from techniques I developed?" Another long pause. "I'd say that would explain a lot about why you've been so patient with her attitude." "The wedding is in 4 months," I said quietly. "Amanda has made it clear that she considers me an embarrassment to your new family. Perhaps it's time she learned who she's actually been lecturing. Dad, what are you planning?" I picked up the invitation to Thomas and Amanda's wedding, noting that it would be held at the Portland Country Club, ND4, the same venue where the American Heart Association held their annual Pacific Northwest Conference, the same venue where I had been honored 3 times for groundbreaking research. "I'm planning to attend my son's wedding," I said. "And I'm planning to wear the cufflinks your mother gave me for my 60th birthday. The ones with the medical symbol, not just any medical symbol, Thomas. The ones with the Kensington 3000 device engraved in platinum. The ones that any cardiac surgeon worth their degree would recognize immediately." I could hear Thomas's sharp intake of breath. "Dad, the American Heart Association president will be at the wedding. Amanda specifically invited him to impress her colleagues." "I know," I said, feeling a smile cross my face for the first time since Sarah's death. "Dr. Richard Hayes and I have been friends for 25 years. We developed the pediatric cardiac protocol together back in the 90s. This is going to be educational," I finished. "Amanda has spent months explaining to me how real medicine works. At the wedding, she'll discover that she's been lecturing the man who wrote the textbook, INT, literally." That night, I carefully selected the suit I would wear to the wedding. Not the simple, off-the-rack clothing Amanda had grown accustomed to seeing, but the custom-tailored navy jacket I had worn to accept the Presidential Medal of Science. In the morning, I would call my tailor to ensure it still fit perfectly. Amanda wanted to see real medicine. At the wedding, surrounded by the colleagues she was so eager to impress, she would finally meet the real Dr. Cornelius Kensington. The morning of June 15th dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Pacific Northwest day that made Portland's reputation for rain seem like a distant myth. From my bedroom window, I could see Mount Hood standing majestically against the cloudless sky, its snow-capped peak catching the early sunlight like a beacon. I had been awake since 5 a.m., not from nerves, but from the quiet anticipation that comes with knowing justice is finally at hand. The custom navy suit hung perfectly pressed in my closet. The platinum cufflinks with the Kensington 3000 engraving polished to a mirror shine. Today, Amanda would discover that assumptions could be more expensive than she had ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Dad, are you sure about this? There's still time to talk to Amanda privately." I typed back. "Some lessons are only learned in public, son. Trust me." By 9 a.m., I was dressed and ready, checking my appearance one final time in the full-length mirror. The man looking back at me bore little resemblance to the humble volunteer Amanda had grown accustomed to dismissing. The suit tailored on Savile Row during a medical conference in London fit like it had been painted on. The cufflinks caught the morning light, their intricate engraving, clearly visible to anyone who cared to look closely. I arrived at Portland Country Club an hour before the ceremony, partly to help with last-minute preparations, but mostly to observe the gathering of Portland's medical elite. Amanda had spared no expense in creating her dream wedding, and her guest list read like a who's who of Pacific Northwest healthcare. The parking lot told its own story. Luxury sedans and imported sports cars bearing the license plate frames of prestigious hospitals and medical groups. I recognized several vehicles belonging to colleagues I hadn't seen in years, doctors who had built their careers on techniques I had pioneered. Inside the club's elegant foyer, Amanda was in her element, gliding between groups of distinguished guests in her pre-ceremony dress. A sophisticated champagne-colored ensemble that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. I watched her work the room with practiced skill name, dropping her Johns Hopkins credentials and highlighting her research achievements. Dr. Martinez, I heard her say to the chief of cardiology at OHSU, I'm so pleased you could attend. I know how busy your schedule must be, especially with the new pediatric wing opening. Congratulations, Amanda, Dr. Martinez replied warmly. Thomas is a lucky man. I understand his father will be joining us today. Amanda's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Cornelius will be here. He's retired. Does volunteer work at a community clinic. The way she said volunteer work made it sound like a character flaw. I moved closer, staying just within earshot, but remaining unnoticed in the crowd. Community medicine is vital work, Dr. Martinez said diplomatically. Some of our most important innovations have come from doctors working with underserved populations. Of course, Amanda agreed quickly, though her tone suggested she considered this unlikely, though there's obviously a significant difference between real cardiac surgery and basic community health services. From across the room, I spotted Dr. Richard Hayes, the American Heart Association president, just arriving with his wife. Richard looked distinguished, as always, in his charcoal suit. His silver hair perfectly styled his bearing, radiating the confidence that came from leading one of the most important medical organizations in the country. Amanda noticed him immediately, her eyes lighting up like a predator spotting prey. "Excuse me, Dr. Martinez," she said with barely contained excitement. "I need to greet a very special guest." I watched her approach Richard with the calculated grace of someone who had been planning this moment for months. This was her chance to cement her reputation among Portland's medical establishment, to demonstrate her connections with national medical leadership. "Dr. Hayes," she said, extending her hand with practiced elegance. "Amanda Cross, thank you so much for honoring us with your presence today." Richard smiled warmly, though I could see him trying to place her in his memory. "Dr. Cross, congratulations on your wedding. Thomas seems like a wonderful young man." He is Amanda beamed. "And I'm so excited for you to meet his family. Well, meet his father anyway. Thomas's mother passed away several years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Richard said, with genuine sympathy. "I'd be honored to meet Thomas's father." "Is he in medicine as well?" Amanda's expression shifted, and I could practically see her calculating how to present me in the most favorable light possible without actually lying. "Cornelius has some medical background," she said carefully. "He volunteers at a local clinic now. Very humble work. Nothing like what you're accustomed to, of course, but he means well." Richard nodded politely, though something in his expression suggested he was reserving judgment. The moment was perfect. Amanda had just positioned me exactly where I wanted to be, as a well-meaning amateur whose medical knowledge was so limited that meeting the AHA president would be the highlight of my modest career. I straightened my cufflinks one final time and began walking toward them, ready to give Amanda the education she had been asking for. "Dr. Hayes," Amanda said, with practiced confidence, "I'd like you to meet Thomas's father, Cornelius Kensington. He's a retired volunteer who helps out at a local community clinic. Nothing too sophisticated, of course, but he enjoys staying busy with simple medical tasks." I extended my hand to Richard, watching his eyes immediately drop to my cufflinks. The recognition was instantaneous. His face transformed from polite interest to genuine shock, then to something approaching awe. "Cornelius Kensington," Richard repeated slowly, his grip tightening on my hand. "The Cornelius Kensington." Amanda's smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, do you two know each other?" Richard ignored her question, his attention focused entirely on me. "Dr. Kensington, I cannot believe you're here. When I heard Thomas's father would be attending, I never imagined. My God, you're a legend." The color began draining from Amanda's face, as she looked between us with growing confusion. I think there might be some mistake. This is just Cornelius. He volunteers at a free clinic. Amanda Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. You're introducing me to one of the most celebrated cardiac surgeons in American medical history. Dr. Kensington pioneered the artificial heart device that bears his name. Half the cardiac procedures performed today use techniques he developed. Amanda's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish gasping for air. Around us, other conversations had begun to quiet as guests sensed something significant happening. But he drives an old truck, Amanda whispered, as if this somehow negated 30 years of groundbreaking surgery. He lives in a tiny house. He's never mentioned any achievements. Dr. Kensington called out Dr. Maria Santos from across the room. I thought that was you. She approached with obvious excitement, her voice carrying clearly through the reception hall. I've been using your pediatric cardiac protocol for 15 years. You revolutionized how we approach congenital heart defects. More heads turned. Dr. James Chen, chief of surgery at Legacy Emmanuel, spotted me and broke away from his conversation. Cornelius, I had no idea you'd be here. Are you finally coming out of retirement? The field needs your expertise now more than ever. Amanda swayed visibly, and Thomas appeared at her side, his face a mixture of pride and concern for his new wife's obvious distress. Dad, Thomas said quietly, maybe we should explain. But the revelation had taken on a life of its own. Dr. Patricia Williams, director of the Oregon Heart Institute, had recognized me and was making her way over with her husband. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to the growing crowd, we have cardiac royalty in our midst. Dr. Cornelius Kensington, the father of modern artificial heart technology. The reception hall buzzed with excitement as more medical professionals gathered around us. Amanda stood frozen in the center of it all, her face cycling through shades of mortification as the full scope of her mistake became clear. Dr. Kensington Richard continued, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Your Kensington 3000 device has saved, over 50,000 lives now, closer to 75,000. At last count, I replied, modestly. Amanda made a small choking sound. 75,000, Amanda. Dr. Santos interjected. Surely you know about Dr. Kensington's work. You're a cardiac surgeon. His research papers are required reading in every cardiothoracic program in the country. Amanda's voice cracked. I had no idea, he never said. The Kensington technique for valve replacement, Dr. Chen added enthusiastically. I just used it yesterday on a pediatric patient. Absolutely brilliant innovation. And the artificial heart patents, Dr. Williams chimed in. Dr. Kensington, those royalties must have made you incredibly wealthy. Amanda's legs gave out slightly, and Thomas quickly steadied her. The woman who had spent months explaining real medicine to me was discovering that she had been lecturing the man who literally wrote the textbook on cardiac surgery. Dr. Kensington Richard said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. I have to ask, why the secrecy? Why hide your achievements? I looked at Amanda, whose face had gone from pale to gray, then at Thomas, whose eyes were shining with pride and understanding. Sometimes, I said quietly, the most important work happens when no one is watching. The patients at the community clinic don't need to know about my patents or awards. They just need someone who cares enough to help. The crowd murmured approvingly, but Amanda looked like she might faint. The woman who had dismissed my volunteer work as meaningless was realizing that one of the most celebrated surgeons in medical history had been choosing to serve the underserved. Amanda Richard said gently, you must be incredibly proud to be joining such a distinguished family. Amanda's response was barely audible. I called him a nobody who never saved a life that mattered. The reception hall fell completely silent. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the gentle clink of champagne glasses, as servers continued their work, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the center of the reception hall. Amanda stood frozen, her designer wedding dress suddenly seeming too heavy for her trembling frame. The medical professionals surrounding us exchanged uncomfortable glances, uncertain how to respond to her devastating admission. Dr. Hayes was the first to break the silence, his voice carefully measured. Amanda, I think perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about Dr. Kensington's background. No misunderstanding, Amanda whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew exactly what I was saying. I thought he was I assumed he was. She couldn't finish the sentence. Thomas moved closer to his wife, his face torn between loyalty and embarrassment. Amanda, maybe we should step outside for a moment. But Amanda seemed rooted to the spot, her mind clearly racing through the implications of what had just been revealed. As a cardiac surgeon herself, she understood better than anyone the magnitude of the achievements surrounding her. She had spent her entire career building toward the kind of recognition that I had walked away from. Dr. Kensington, Dr. Santos said gently, perhaps we should give the family some privacy to process this. No, Amanda said suddenly, her voice stronger but edged with desperation. Please don't leave. I need to. I need everyone to understand that I didn't know. I would never have. She turned to face the assembled medical professionals, her face flushed with shame. I'm not the kind of person who dismisses medical achievements. My entire career is built on respecting the pioneers who came before us. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably. Amanda, we all make assumptions sometimes. Not like this, she insisted, her voice cracking. I lectured him about cardiac medicine. I told him his volunteer work was meaningless. I said he'd never saved a life that mattered. Each admission seemed to physically pain her. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. These weren't just personal insults. They were professional blasphemies, spoken about a man whose innovations had saved more lives than most hospitals see in a decade. Amanda, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the revelation began, what matters now is what you do next. She turned to me with desperate eyes. Dr. Kensington, I am so profoundly sorry. I don't know how to begin to make this right. My behavior was inexcusable, unprofessional, and... She paused, struggling for words. And cruel. Thomas took her hand, his own face reflecting the complexity of the situation. He was proud of his father, but devastated for his wife. The thing is, Amanda continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, I pride myself on recognizing excellence in medicine. I've built my career on studying the work of pioneers like you. How could I have been so blind, so arrogant? Dr. Williams, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Amanda, perhaps this is a conversation better suited for a private moment. No, Amanda said firmly. I made my judgments publicly. I insulted Dr. Kensington in front of colleagues, patients, anyone who would listen. If I'm going to apologize, it should be just as public. She turned back to me, tears now visible in her eyes. Dr. Kensington, I have used your techniques in my own surgeries. I have cited your research in my publications. I have recommended your innovations to colleagues. And all the while I was treating the man who created them like he was beneath my notice. The irony was devastating, and everyone present understood its implications. Amanda hadn't just insulted a stranger. She had dismissed her own medical hero without recognizing him. I understand if you can never forgive me, she continued. I understand if this ruins my relationship with Thomas. I understand if my colleagues lose respect for me. I deserve all of that and more. Thomas squeezed her hand. Amanda, Dad isn't vindictive. He's not trying to destroy your career. But Amanda shook her head. Thomas, your father has every right to be angry. I questioned his medical knowledge. I dismissed his life's work. I treated him like he was an embarrassment to our family. She looked around at the assembled doctors. In front of people who knew better, Dr. Hayes cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps we should allow Dr. Kensington to respond. All eyes turned to me, waiting to see how I would handle Amanda's public humiliation. The woman who had spent months lecturing me about respect and professional achievement was now completely at my mercy. Thomas watched me with anxious eyes, torn between defending his wife and supporting his father. The medical professionals waited with the careful attention of people witnessing a moment that would define careers and relationships. Amanda stood before me, her professional confidence stripped away, waiting for judgment from the man whose legacy she had unknowingly spent years building her own career upon. The next words I spoke would determine not just Amanda's fate, but the future of our family. I looked at Amanda for a long moment, seeing not the arrogant surgeon who had dismissed me for months, but a young woman who had just learned the most humbling lesson of her professional life. The silence stretched between us, heavy with anticipation and the weight of consequences. Amanda, I said. Finally, my voice gentle but clear enough for everyone to hear. Do you know why I chose to work at the community clinic instead of maintaining a prestigious practice? She shook her head, tears still threatening to spill. Because the most important thing I learned in 40 years of medicine is that every life has equal value regardless of the patient's ability to pay for care. The grandmother with heart failure who can't afford insurance matters just as much as the CEO who can buy the best treatment money can offer. I paused, letting the words sink in. Around us, the medical professionals nodded with understanding, recognizing a fundamental truth of their profession. You made assumptions about my worth based on external appearances, an ascension. My truck, my house, my simple lifestyle. But more importantly, you made assumptions about the worth of the patients I serve. You called their lives meaningless, their care unimportant. Amanda's face crumpled. You're right. I was wrong about everything. Yes, you were wrong, I agreed. But being wrong isn't the same as being irredeemable. Thomas stepped closer, hope flickering in his eyes as he sensed the direction of my words. Amanda, I've watched you for 6 months. I've seen your dedication to your patients at Johns Hopkins. I've seen your genuine love for my son. I've seen your passion for medicine even when it was misdirected. I smiled slightly. You're not a bad person. You're a good doctor who forgot that medicine is about more than prestige and recognition. Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. Dr. Kensington, your grace in this situation is remarkable. Grace is easy when you remember that we've all made mistakes, I replied. The question isn't whether Amanda made errors in judgment. The question is whether she's learned from them. I turned back to Amanda, who was watching me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Amanda, I forgive you completely. But more importantly, I want you to forgive yourself and use this experience to become not just a better doctor, but a better person. How she whispered. How do I move forward from this? By remembering that every patient deserves your respect, regardless of their insurance coverage or social status. By treating the janitor in your hospital with the same courtesy you show the hospital board members. By understanding that true medical excellence isn't measured in awards or recognition, but in lives touched with compassion. Thomas moved to embrace both Amanda and me, his relief evident. Thank you, Dad. For everything. Dr. Santos wiped away a tear. Dr. Kensington, this is why you're legendary. Not just for your surgical innovations, but for your character. Amanda looked up at me, her voice stronger now. I promise you I will never forget this lesson. Every patient I treat, every colleague I work with, every person I meet, I will remember that worth isn't determined by appearances or assumptions. That's all any of us can do, I said. Learn, grow, and treat each other with the dignity every human being deserves. Dr. Hayes raised his champagne glass. To Dr. Cornelius Kensington, M.A., a surgeon, a teacher, and a gentleman who reminds us all why we entered medicine in the first place. The assembled medical professionals raised their glasses in agreement, their faces reflecting genuine admiration not just for my surgical achievements, but for the grace I had shown in a moment of justified anger. As the crowd gradually dispersed, returning to wedding celebration, Amanda approached me one final time. Dr. Kensington, Dedner Cornelius. Dad, she corrected herself with a small smile. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I won't waste it. We all deserve second chances, Amanda. What we do with them defines who we become. Thomas put his arms around both of us, his face beaming with joy. I love you both, and I'm proud to be part of this family. As the evening continued, I watched Amanda interact with the other guests, noting the subtle but significant changes in her demeanor. She listened more carefully, judged less quickly, and treated everyone, from the distinguished doctors to the serving staff, with genuine respect. Later, as the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Dr. Hayes approached me one final time. Cornelius, that was masterfully handled. You turned what could have been a career-ending humiliation into a teaching moment. Richard, we're all teachers and students in this profession. Amanda learned something valuable today, but so did everyone else who witnessed it. What's that? I looked across the room at Amanda and Thomas, dancing together with obvious love and newfound understanding. That true strength isn't found in crushing someone when they're down. It's found in lifting them up and helping them become better than they were. As I drove home that evening, I thought about Sarah and how proud she would have been of the choice I made. Justice without compassion is just revenge, but compassion guided by wisdom can transform lives. Amanda had learned that respect isn't earned through titles or achievements, but given freely as a recognition of shared humanity. And perhaps in teaching her that lesson, I had honored Sarah's memory in the most meaningful way possible. This story reminds us that true worth isn't measured by the car we drive, the house we live in, or the clothes we wear. It's measured by how we treat others, especially those we perceive as having less than us. Amanda's mistake wasn't just about misjudging one man. It was about creating a hierarchy of human value based on external appearances. In our daily lives, we encounter people whose stories we don't know, whose achievements remain hidden, whose struggles are invisible to us. The janitor might be working 3 jobs to support his family. The quiet neighbor might be a retired teacher who shaped hundreds of young minds. The elderly person at the grocery store might have once saved lives as a paramedic. Every person we meet carries a lifetime of experiences, wisdom, and dignity that deserves our respect. When we judge others by their circumstances rather than their character, we reveal more about ourselves than about them. Dr. Cornelius Kensington's choice to forgive Amanda wasn't just about family harmony. It was about recognizing that we all have the capacity to grow, to learn, and to become better versions of ourselves. His grace in the face of months of condescension showed us that true strength lies not in crushing those who wrong us, but in lifting them up and helping them see a better path forward. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply being the person you were raised to be. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.